Greeted by Marcel Khalifa here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we return now to the conclusion of our public conversation with Noam Chomsky, professor of linguistics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, we were speaking at Harvard Memorial Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We talked about the risk he took as an anti-war activist. But first, I asked him about what he thought of the Obama administration, what it should be doing with Israel and Palestine.
Israel-Palestine happens to be a particularly easy case. I mean, there has been an overwhelming international consensus for 35 years on how to settle the problem, short-term at least, namely a two-state settlement on the international border, which everyone agrees on, with the phrase was minor and mutual modifications. That was U.S. official policy until the U.S. departed from the world in the early 70s, as it did. That's just overwhelming. I mean, there was a Security Council resolution in 1976 calling for a two-state settlement. The U.S. vetoed it. And it just goes on from there. I won't run through it. But if you get till today, there's just overwhelming agreement. I mean, it includes all the Arab states for a long time. It includes Iran, the Organization of Islamic States. It includes Hamas, you know. In fact, everybody except the United States and Israel. So what has Obama had to say about this? Well, it's interesting. He has this great vision, but if you go below the vision and take a look at the words, it's a little different. So his only words so far, there are two really. One is to politely ask Israel to stop expanding settlements. Well, first of all, that's meaningless. The issue is the existence, not the expansion of the settlements. But furthermore, those words were also meaningless. He was quoting Bush. In fact, he was quoting what's called the roadmap, the official, supposedly the agreed upon scenario for moving forward. He was quoting it. Okay, that's meaningless, but that's part of his great vision. The other part, which is more interesting, was a few days after he took office. And he gave his one, and so far only, a serious talk about Israel-Palestine. That's when he was introducing George Mitchell as his negotiator, which is a good choice if he's given any leeway. And Obama explained what he was going to do. He said, this was his, being very forthcoming to the Arab world. He said, well, there's a constructive proposal on the table, the Arab peace proposal, pat people on the head for producing it, and then he went on to say, well, it's time for the Arabs to live up to their peace proposal. They should start normalizing relations with Israel. Well, Obama's literate, intelligent. I suppose he chooses his words carefully. He knows perfectly well that that was not the Arab peace proposal. The Arab peace proposal re-endorsed the long-standing international consensus and said, in the context of a two-state settlement, the Arab states will proceed even beyond to normalize relations with Israel. Well, Obama picked out the corollary, but omitted the substance, which is a way of saying we're going to maintain our rejectionist stance. Couldn't have been clearer. And that's what's happened. With regard to his repetition of the call to stop expansion of settlements, he did go a little bit farther. Not he, but his spokespersons in press conferences. They were asked, is the administration going to do anything about it, and if Israel rejects it? And they said, no, it's purely symbolic. In fact, explicitly said that the administration is not going to do what George Bush I did. George Bush I had some light taps on the wrist if Israel continued to reject what the U.S. was asking for. Clinton pretty much withdrew that, and Obama withdrew it totally. He said, no, this is just symbolic. Well, that's telling Benjamin Netanyahu, go ahead and do what you like. We'll say we don't like it, but there'll be a wink saying, yeah, go ahead. Meanwhile, we participate in it. We send you the arms, we give you the diplomatic support and the direct participation. That's the vision, It could hardly be clearer. Now, what can we do about it? Well, we can get the United States to join the world. In this case, it's literally the whole world. Just join the world and accept the international consensus and stop the direct participation in violating it. I mean, what Israel is doing, and it should, what the U.S. and Israel are doing, everything Israel does is a joint operation. They can't go beyond what the U.S. permits and participates in. So what the U.S. and Israel are doing in Gaza and in the West Bank is destroying the hope for realization of the international consensus. And there's no alternative around, I should say, with regard to a lot of the pro-Palestinian supporters of the Palestinians. In fact, some of the leading Palestinian activists themselves are saying, well, we ought to give up on the two-state solution and just let Israel take over all the territories, maybe annex them, and then there'll be a civil rights struggle, and like an anti-apartheid struggle, and that can work like South Africa. That's just blindness. That's not going to happen. The U.S. and Israel are not going to permit that to happen. They're going to continue with exactly what they're doing, strangling Gaza, separating it from the West Bank in violation of international agreements, and in the West Bank, take over whatever they want.
As you look out on folks here, many young people, many students, I was wondering if you could reflect on your career at the moments when you had to make a decision about whether to take a risk that might risk your position or your standing in some way. When you felt what you say to people when it comes to issues of courage.
Well, you know, I don't like to talk about myself. It's not important, but since you asked a couple of times. The first time, I mean, I had been a political activist all my life, you know, since childhood, when you talked about my newsstand and so on. But with regard to, say, really doing something, say, becoming involved with the non-existent anti-war movement, the first time was around 1962. You could see what was happening in 1962. It wasn't really concealed. And I decided to try to get involved in organizing anti-war activism. Now, it wasn't risky, but it meant giving up a lot. You cannot put, I don't have to tell you, you can't put one toe in this. If you get into it, it's a full-time occupation.
Were you a tenured professor at the time? In 1956, you went to MIT, you were teaching.
1955, I forget what year it was, but it wasn't a consideration. In fact, it may be odd for you to think about, but MIT in the 1960s had two interesting characteristics. One was it was almost entirely funded by the Pentagon. In fact, I was in a lab which was 100% funded by the three armed services. Two, it was the main center of anti-war resistance. I'm not talking about dissent or, you know, protest. I'm talking about resistance, you know, organizing resistance activities, illegal activities. And the Pentagon didn't care much because contrary to what a lot of people believe, one of the main functions of the Pentagon is just to provide a cover for the way the economy functions. The way the economy functions is, you know, people like to claim it's a free market economy, but you know, most of it comes out of the state sector. I mean, computers, internet, airplanes. You know, the idea is the public is supposed to pay the costs and take the risks, and if anything works out, you hand it over to private enterprise. That's called the free market. And the way when the economy was mainly electronics based, the Pentagon was the cover. So, you know, you got to do this because the Russians are coming. But they actually didn't really care what you were doing. I mean, it's an interesting story. Anyhow, so yeah, maybe I was tenured, maybe not, but it didn't matter.